the relationship between racism and unemployment. And we have Cam TV here, and they are filming us, so I'll be on your guys' But thank you for coming out. Our first panelist is Dr. Finley Campbell, and he is with the Social Justice Council here at the First Unitarian Church. Dr. Campbell is the program coordinator of the Chicago chapter of the Unitarian Universalist Christian Fellowship and chair of the Racial Justice Task Force of the Social Justice Council at the First Unitarian Church in Hyde Park. He has been concerned about issues of unemployment in general and racist unemployment in particular since the Poor People's Campaign of 1968. He is also senior professor emeritus from DeVry University, the Chicago campus, and he has been a social justice activist since 1969. On my other side is Dr. Dick David, and he is from Cook County Hospital. Dr. David is the clinical director of the neonatal intensive care unit at Stroger Hospital of Cook County and professor of pediatrics at the UIC College of Medicine. His academic research has focused on the impact of race and racism on infant mortality in the United States. His collaboration over the past 25 years with Dr. James Collins at Northwestern University has produced a body of work calling into question the biologic concept of race itself. Their studies show how racism, not race, working through a variety of social, economic, and environmental mechanisms, is responsible for adverse birth outcomes for Americans, especially, but not limited to African Americans. On the other side is Walter Bush, and he is from the Renaissance Collaborator, and he is an entrepreneur, motivational speaker, urban planner, and community developer, focusing on economic development. Walter has taken his creative energies and insights to focus on assisting communities and organizations with business development initiatives and workforce training. Currently, he is the Education and Employment Manager for the Renaissance Collaborative, which is in Bronxville, where he oversees all research and programming encompassing workforce development, business development, and training. Walter holds a master's degree in urban planning and policy from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and a bachelor's degree, the highest honors, in sociology from Lewis University. On the other side, we have Nanette Campos. Nanette is a business owner and is a regional vice president with Primerica. She has been mentoring others for almost 10 years and has been successful at cultivating a diverse working environment. She has a bachelor's degree in computer networking from Purdue University, Canada. And on the other side of her is Samuel Gutierrez, and he is currently a business owner as well and a financial education coach with Primerica. He has been with Primerica for 5 years, but previously he worked in management with the Chicago Transit Authority for over 7 years. And so now we're going to jump right into the first question so that we can get going on this. So the first question, and we're going to start with Dr. Campbell, is speaking from your research, experience, etc., how would you describe the relationship between racism and unemployment, or employment, if you are coming from that side of the issue?
Before I do that, I'd just like to commend our church, First Unitarian Church, for hosting this activity. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is celebrating our 175th anniversary, and we're having a big, wonderful, fancy gala down at the Cultural Center. And if you have $100, we wish you to join us. It will go to a worthy cause. Keep this church in action. If I had to give a title to my response, I would call it God's Plan for Employment Salvation, 6 hours of work for 8 hours paid. The question that's presented asks for connections. It is a fundamental fact that since the ratification of the Constitution, racism has been connected to employment, with the division between free labor, which was predominantly white, and slave labor, which was predominantly black. The so-called 3/5 rule was the racial equation used to make that division. The way in which racism works today within this finance capital system, that is a system where the banks and insurance companies and other large financial institutions control the economy. The way in which racism works today is that it must keep large segments of the working class deliberately unemployed. deliberately unemployed in order to keep down inflation. Inflation for the finance capitalists, or the banksters, as some people call them, is the greatest fear in the hierarchical people at the top. See Mr. Bernanke's report today. And the best way to do that within the present imperialist system is to use racism, because racism is the historic default position for controlling economic life in this country. Or more precisely, neo-racism. This is a term which I developed to refer to the way in which African American elites now help to keep that racism more acceptable, particularly since today we see the intersection of class and race based upon looking down upon the lower class black folks, particularly black youth and young adults. There are some examples of this racism working with unemployment. We eliminated, we didn't do it, they eliminated affirmative action, and the person leading the charge was an African American, Glenn Lowry. They have eliminated race-specific quotas on the job, so as you walk down the street and see all this repairs going on, count the number of black folks you see taking those jobs. And by pitting blacks against Latinos, they hope to keep that divide and conquer process still going. They still have the last hired, first fired mechanism, but it's shaped by a kind of seniority bias, which itself grew out of a good struggle on the part of the unions, but which eventually turned into racism because some of these unions kept black folks and Latino folks out for full-time participation. So if we were to say in a nutshell, if we're going to solve the question of unemployment and connect it to racism, we must recognize that fact, that racism is needed today to maintain this unemployment situation, because if everybody had a job, this system, based upon controlling money supply, would be in deep trouble. Inflation is created, they say, by people having too much money in their pockets and spending it. So imagine if everybody had a job and was spending that money. So clearly we need to figure out a way, as we move down this historic path, to get past this idea that in order to protect the value of the gold and the silver and the dollar bills and the rubles and the yen and the euro, people must be forced into situations like this. Like this. Like this. The homelessness is simply folks without a job. That's all it is. People without work, can't pay the rent, end up on the streets as if it was a separate problem from this reality that we have described. And so to me, there's this historic connection going back to the days of slavery between racism and employment and unemployment.
Sure. I come at the question of racism in general and racist unemployment from the perspective of my clinical work, taking care of newborn babies, and also as an epidemiologist, a study of the pattern of disease in the population. A striking feature of health in the age group that I deal with, that is infants, is that the likelihood of a baby dying in the first year of life in this country is 2.5 times as high if that baby is African American than if he or she is white. That's one of the two most striking features. The other striking feature, by the way, is that everybody in this country is at greater risk. Infants born to white parents in the United States, if they were ranked as a separate country, would still rank 25th in the world for infant mortality. The whole country is 29th. So it doesn't help you that much to be white. So there's a systemic problem affecting the entire population. As mentioned in the introduction about my work that I've done with Jim Collins over the last several years, we started out in the same perspective or than everyone else, except we were skeptical. When they said there was something about black race that caused bad health outcomes, it didn't really make sense to us that that should be the case biologically. And it turns out that, in fact, you can find black infants who were born in Illinois who weigh the same amount as white infants. It turns out they're infants born to women who immigrated here from West Africa. So if there was a low birth weight gene and they came from Africa, well, they would have more of it than African Americans. So that kind of dismissed the genetic theory, the biological concept of race from the whole study of what we're doing. And as we turned our attention to social construct of race, which could be said more succinctly by just using the word racism, racial discrimination, we find that just about every aspect that we look at is predictive of bad health outcomes. Not just infant mortality, but high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, etc. The list goes on. What are the manifestations? Well, in broad categories, we could start with historical, as Dr. Campbell pointed out, going back to the legacy of slavery. Moving into institutional, those structures which exist in our society, which treat people unequally. The distribution of the population in a living space. Chicago is the most segregated city in the United States, decade after decade, when the University of Chicago demographers check it again. This has a major impact on health outcomes, and probably this is all mediated through social and economic mechanisms. And finally, the last one on the list, which I would refer to as interpersonal racism, is probably, in some ways, the least powerful in some cases, but it's the one that we think of first when the word racism is used. This would be the personal discrimination of one person against another. It is that last one, however, that is the cutting edge, I think, of racist unemployment. I'll just mention one piece of research that was done by somebody else. I think really speaks to this more clearly than anything. A researcher from Northwestern did a study in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, about 8 years ago. You may have heard of. In this study, they had white and African American actors, basically, present themselves for job interviews and make applications in a series of entry-level jobs. They had identical resumes, and they presented themselves in a very professional manner. Half of the time, they would have on their resume prior conviction for drug possession. The others were clean resume, just their education and so forth. Interestingly, for both groups, white and black, it was a disadvantage to have been convicted for drug possession. Okay, not a big surprise. What was a little shocking was that if you were an applicant with an absolutely clean record, who'd never had any trouble with the law, and you were black, you had less chance of being called for a job interview than if you were white and had been convicted of drug possession. This says to me that it's not a level playing field out there, and it's not that no one who is black can get a job, obviously, or that anyone who is not black is going to get a job, obviously. However, the deck is stacked, and this is just one specific example of the types of stressors that exist in people's lives, and these impact on a variety of health outcomes, including childbearing.
Just to chime in, and I'm definitely in agreement with the panel. To give you a background of my perspective, I come from a research and ground level perspective. I'm in the field every day working with job seekers who are looking for jobs. I work with ex-offenders, formerly homeless individuals. But not only that, I've done research in the academy that backs up the notion that racism does exist in our society today. Not only racial discrimination, age discrimination, gender discrimination, they're still prevalent in today's workforce. And as W.E.B. Du Bois stated in 1903, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Well, that's still true today. Race and racial discrimination exists very much so in employment. Especially in today's climate, we have so much unemployment. People are out here fighting for resources. And as I said, working with the groups of people I work with on a daily basis, it's very hard for blacks and Latinos and other minorities to succeed in the workforce, as the panel said, when you have the deck stacked against you. And just piggybacking on what the gentleman here said, there's another piece of research that I became acquainted with when I was in grad school working on my master's degree. And it was actually a study completed by Professor Deborah Pager and Bruce Western from Princeton University. And it was based on discrimination in low-wage labor markets. It was completed in 2005. And what the research showed was that white job seekers fresh out of prison had a better chance of gaining employment than blacks with no criminal record. The research was done, as I said, in New York City at about 1,500 private employers. The research went on to show that a criminal record reduced positive responses from employers by about 35% for white applicants and 57% for black applicants. Even without criminal records, black applicants had low rates of positive responses, about the same as the response rate for white applicants with criminal records. The bright spot in this study, I guess, it showed that minority employers were more accepting of minority applicants and job applicants with prison records. The basis of the study actually showed how young men who applied for real job openings throughout the city presented the same qualifications and experience, whether black or white. And to just go on with the whole notion of unemployment, in the communities that I actually work in, which is Grand Boulevard, Douglas, Bronzeville, according to the U.S. Census, unemployment was 25% in 2000. And when the norm for America, you know, if we're at 11% and that's devastating, these communities have been facing 25% for years. But now, in this economic catastrophe we're in now, we're looking at unemployment rates for blacks and Latinos at 50 to 60%. So I would say that's a state of emergency, if anything.
Racism in relation to employment or unemployment or employment, it's a very tricky thing. I was a manager for the Chicago Transit Authority for about 7 years, and when I started with the company, I didn't have a college degree, I didn't have any management training, and I actually started washing cars there. And I was pulled in because I knew somebody who knew somebody, and what the boss told me was, hey, you know what, where did you do before? I said I worked for a bank. He says, well, you're about to make more money than you ever made in your entire life. Now, at that point in time, I was already making $15 an hour washing cars and doing whatever jobs they told me to do, but I had no clue what was planned for me based on the fact that I had a family member who worked there in a higher position. The family member wasn't directly in my department, but I started being groomed. I was groomed to learn the administrative part. I became my general manager's right-hand guy. I was his administrative manager, dealing with FMLA, dealing with disciplinary action, all this stuff that I was kind of just thrust into, and I was grateful for the opportunity But as I got more engulfed in this opportunity, I started to see the grander picture. Okay? There was a white manager, there was a Mexican manager, there was a black manager, and there was an Asian manager. So, and what I saw there was still racism and discrimination, but it was strategically put in place to protect the overall company. Now, don't get me wrong, I mean, my vice president's senior vice president was an African American. But it doesn't matter what rank you hold, it matters who your connections are and who's going to tell who what to do. I hear so many people criticize the President of the United States of America, and they don't realize he is not the complete and ultimate power that be. You know, there was a documentary on the History Channel today talking about how the president stepped into the first day. They don't even know what they're doing. They have a bunch of people telling them what they need to do. So at that point, I believe that it's, you know, the undertones of discrimination are there, the racism's there, but it's, you know, strategically handled, everything from promotion to discipline. Since I started my own business and I found the opportunity that I found, what I found was, in the company that I worked for, I had the ability to hire and work with people that I decided to work with based on their character, not necessarily what they look like or what their family background was or what neighborhood they came from. The only three things they asked me when I interviewed with this company was, are you a good person, are you willing to work, and are you willing to learn? And since I started with this company, I've seen nothing but examples of people who were from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and they become successful, not necessarily based because the company made them successful, because them as the individual made the decision and did the things and put themselves in place to do that. So, you know, you could look at it twofold, and yes, it's out there, it's alive and well, but on the other hand, us as individuals have the ability to go after what we want and make things happen for ourselves.